Wolf invades church and begs priest for help. The secret behind it will shock you. The animal appeared wounded at the altar, as if begging for divine help. Not understanding why, the priest decides to follow it through the dark and silent forest. What the religious man finds changes his faith, his mission, and the story of the entire community. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. I promise, this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Father Anthony was arranging objects on the altar of the small chapel of Our Lady of Guidance, located on the edge of Blue Ridge Forest, a mountainous region in rural Virginia. The village of Golden Ridge was quiet, with only a few hundred inhabitants, simple people who lived from cultivating medicinal herbs and small farms. The spiritual leader's routine rarely changed. He celebrated masses, counseled the faithful, and carried out community work with the same dedication for 20 years. That June afternoon, while organizing the sacred books and finishing cleaning the altar, a strange sound caught his attention. A prolonged and melancholic howl cut through the customary silence. Father Anthony, 55, was a man of medium stature, with graying hair and deeply blue eyes that contrasted with his tanned skin. He paused his tasks, trying to identify the source of that lament. It must be just the wind in the trees, he thought, resuming his task. But the howl repeated, this time closer and more urgent. There was something in the tone that touched the priest's heart. It was as if someone were calling him directly. Moved by a curiosity he couldn't explain, he walked to the chapel door and opened it slowly. His eyes widened. Less than 15 feet from the entrance, an impressive gray wolf stared at him. The animal showed no aggression, just observed him with amber eyes that seemed to contain an ancient intelligence. "My God," whispered the priest, holding onto the doorframe. For a moment, man and animal remained motionless, as if time had frozen in that improbable encounter. The wolf stepped back and looked at the priest again, as if inviting him to follow. Anthony knew there had been no wolves in that region for decades. The presence of that animal was inexplicable and at the same time seemed filled with purpose. "You want me to follow you?" he asked in a low voice, feeling somewhat foolish for talking to the animal. The wolf howled again and took a few more steps toward the forest, looking back as if confirming the religious man's question. Something moved. Inside Anthony, a sensation he hadn't experienced since he was young, when he felt the call to religious life. It was as if a greater force pushed him toward that encounter. He took a deep breath, quickly entered the chapel, grabbed a flashlight and his thickest coat. The nights in the mountains were mercilessly cold, and left, locking the door behind him. "What madness am I doing?" he muttered to himself as he followed the wolf that was now entering the woods. The path was difficult. The forest became denser with each step, and the last rays of sun barely penetrated through the tree canopies. The wolf, however, seemed to know the path perfectly, avoiding obstacles and choosing the safest passages. Anthony followed with difficulty, scratching himself on thorns and stumbling on exposed roots. After almost an hour of walking, when night had already fallen completely and only the flashlight guided his steps, the priest began to question his decision. What if it was just a common wild animal? What if he was being led into a trap? His rational mind tried to find explanations, but something deeper compelled him to continue. The wolf stopped abruptly in a small clearing. Anthony approached cautiously and directed the flashlight to where the animal was looking. What he saw made his heart tighten. A female wolf, visibly injured, was caught in a crude trap. Around her, 3 small cubs whimpered, frightened and hungry. "So that's it," murmured the priest, finally understanding the purpose of that journey. The she-wolf tried to stand when the light hit her, but fell again with a yelp of pain. The trap had severely injured her hind leg, and the blood, though no longer flowing intensely, stained the ground around her. The cubs, gray like their father, couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. The wolf that had guided him approached, his mate, licking her muzzle in a gesture of comfort before turning back to face the priest. Those amber eyes seemed to beg for help. Anthony felt a lump in his throat. His entire life had been dedicated to the spiritual care of human beings, But at that moment, he felt his calling expanded beyond the boundaries of his species. He set the flashlight on the ground and approached slowly, speaking in a low and gentle voice so as not to frighten the animals. "I'm here to help. I won't hurt you." The female wolf watched him with distrust, but she was too weak to react. The male wolf remained alert but not threatening, as if aware that this human was the only hope for his family. With trembling hands, Anthony examined the trap. It was an old device, the kind used by illegal hunters. The metal jaw had closed over the wolf's paw, but fortunately hadn't completely broken the bone. Even so, the wound was serious and required immediate care. "I need to open this," he said to himself, looking for a release mechanism. He found a lever on the side of the device and, applying all his strength, managed to open it enough to free the animal's paw. The she-wolf whimpered in pain but didn't try to bite. She seemed to understand that he was helping. Once free from the trap, Anthony tore the hem of his shirt and improvised a bandage, tying it firmly around the wound to stop the bleeding. As he worked, he murmured prayers in Latin, asking for protection and healing for these beings. The cubs, initially frightened, now approached curiously, sniffing the priest's hands. The male wolf stayed close, vigilant but serene. "You can't stay here," said Anthony, looking around. "Hunters might come back." As if understanding his words, the male wolf moved a few meters away and howled softly, as if calling. Anthony understood that he should follow him again. Carefully, he improvised a stretcher using his coat, and with the help of the wolf himself, who seemed to understand the intention, managed to place the injured female on the fabric. The cubs followed closely, guided by the instinct to stay near their mother. The group continued for a few more minutes until they reached a small cave hidden by dense vines. The wolf entered first, as if showing the way, and Anthony followed, carrying the wounded female. The interior was surprisingly dry and protected from the wind. A perfect refuge. Carefully, he settled the she-wolf at the back of the cave, making sure she was comfortable. The cubs immediately nestled next to their mother, seeking warmth and protection. The male wolf positioned himself at the entrance of the cave like an attentive guardian. Anthony knew he needed to do more. The wound required professional care and the cubs needed food, but he also knew he couldn't simply take a family of wolves to the village. People feared these animals, considered dangerous predators. "I'll come back tomorrow," he promised, looking into the eyes of the she-wolf who, even wounded, maintained the dignity of a wild creature. "I'll bring food and medicine." Leaving the cave, the reality of his situation hit him. He was alone in the forest in the middle of the night, far from the chapel, not knowing the way back. But before panic could overtake him, the wolf appeared at his side. "Will you show me the way back?" Anthony asked, surprised by the connection that seemed to exist between them. In response, the animal began to walk slowly, occasionally looking back to make sure the human was following. And so, guided by the creature that hours before he would have considered a threat, Father Anthony began his journey back to the village, knowing that his life had changed forever. When the first rays of sun appeared on the horizon, Father Anthony was already on his way to the forest, with a backpack containing food, water, and a first aid kit he'd obtained from the small village pharmacy. He had barely slept, his mind filled with images of the wolves and questions about the meaning of that extraordinary encounter. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he almost didn't notice the unusual movement in the central square. A group of men armed with shotguns was gathering, accompanied by hunting dogs anxiously sniffing the air. Among them, he recognized Jerome Brandon, an influential farmer in the region, known for his intolerance toward wild animals that approached his properties. "They found wolf tracks near the creek," Jerome was telling the others. "Must be a large pack. We can't risk them attacking our livestock." Anthony's heart raced. It couldn't be a coincidence. He approached the group, trying to appear casual. "Good morning, my children. What's happening so early?" he asked, forcing a calm tone that didn't reflect his anxiety. "Our father, we're organizing a hunt," replied Jerome. "Wolves have appeared in the region. Dangerous creatures, you know. Better to eliminate them before they cause problems." Anthony felt a chill down his spine. He needed to stop them, but how? He couldn't. simply reveal that he had found the wolves and was helping them. He would be considered crazy or worse, a traitor to the community. "Wolves? Are you sure?" he questioned, buying time. "There haven't been wolves in this region for decades." "The tracks don't lie, Father," insisted Jerome, "and my foreman saw one with his own eyes last night, a huge grey beast." Other men agreed, adding stories of sightings and rumors of attacks on livestock. Anthony realized that fear was spreading rapidly, fueled by superstitions and old prejudices. "Before you go out killing God's creatures, shouldn't you consider other solutions?" suggested the priest, trying to appeal to the spiritual side of these men. "Violence should always be the last resort, not the first." Some seemed to hesitate, but Jerome laughed with disdain. "With all due respect, Father, leave the protection of our families and herds to us. You take care of souls, we'll take care of the rest." The conversation was interrupted by the frantic barking of the dogs. They had picked up a trail and were pulling hard on their leashes, pointing exactly in the direction of the path that led to the cave where the wolves were hiding. Anthony made a quick decision. He couldn't let those men find the wolf family, especially the injured female and her defenseless cubs. "I had a vision last night," he suddenly announced, his voice louder and firmer than usual. The group stopped, looking at him with surprise. The priest's words had always been respected in the community. "A vision that showed me that not everything is what it seems," he continued. "I was called to enter the forest and witness a miracle." The men exchanged confused glances, but no one dared to interrupt him. "I saw creatures that some would call beasts, but that in the eyes of God are as worthy of compassion as any living being," Anthony continued, carefully choosing his words. "They are not monsters to be feared, but families just trying to survive like all of us." A heavy silence settled. Even Jerome seemed disconcerted. "Are you saying that God doesn't want us to kill these wolves?" finally asked one of the older men, visibly disturbed. "I'm saying that violence is rarely the answer God expects from us," replied Anthony. "I just ask that you come with me. Let me show you what I saw before you decide what to do." It was a risky request, but Anthony knew it was his only chance. If he could bring them to the wolves on his own terms, perhaps he could control the situation and protect the animals. After a few moments of heated discussion, the group agreed to follow the priest, more out of respect for his position than conviction in his words. Anthony led the way, silently praying that he was making the right choice. The trail through the forest was tense. The dogs, kept firmly on their leashes, barked occasionally, eager to be released. The men followed in, silence, weapons ready. Anthony walked ahead, his heart pounding in his chest. When they approached the clearing where he had found the wolves the night before, Anthony stopped and turned to the group. "What you are about to see may challenge everything you believe about these animals," he said. "I only ask that you observe with an open heart." With that, he took a few steps forward and whistled softly, the same sound he had made the night before when saying goodbye to the male wolf. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, as if materializing from the shadows, the impressive grey wolf appeared among the trees. The men instinctively backed away, weapons pointed. The dogs went crazy, barking and growling. Anthony raised his hands, asking for calm. "Don't shoot. Please observe." The wolf remained at a safe distance, eyes fixed on the group. He showed neither fear nor aggression, just a dignified caution. Then, to everyone's amazement, he slowly advanced until stopping beside the priest. "My God," someone in the group murmured. Anthony knelt down, and in a gesture that made everyone hold their breath, extended his hand. The wolf approached and allowed him to touch his thick fur. "This is the animal you fear," said the priest, his voice soft but clear. "Last night, he guided me through the forest so I could help his mate, injured in an illegal trap." The expressions of shock intensified. Jerome, still suspicious, took a step forward. "How do we know this isn't some kind of trick, Father? Maybe it's a domesticated animal." "Follow me," Anthony simply responded, standing up. The wolf turned and began walking toward the cave, occasionally, looking back as if checking if the group was following him. Anthony went after him, and after a brief hesitation, the men did the same, keeping the dogs firmly restrained. Upon reaching the entrance to the cave, Anthony asked that only Jerome accompany him so as not to frighten the cubs. Reluctantly, but driven by curiosity, the farmer agreed, handing his weapon to a companion. The interior of the cave was as Anthony had left it the night before. The she-wolf rested on the coat, improvised as a bed, her breathing more regular, but still weak. The 3 cubs were nestled against her body, asleep. Jerome stood paralyzed before the scene. His face, normally hard and uncompromising, softened for a moment. "The trap almost severed her paw," explained Anthony in a low voice. "I did what I could, but she needs proper care." "Traps are illegal in this area," murmured Jerome, frowning. "Especially that type with metal teeth." "Yes, they are," agreed the priest. "Someone is hunting illegally in our forests, and these animals were victims." The male wolf entered the cave and positioned himself beside his mate, gently licking her muzzle. The cubs awakened and, seeing their father, began to stir excitedly. "They are a family," said Jerome, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. "Yes, Jerome. Her family that needs help, not persecution." The 2 men left the cave in silence. Outside, the group was anxiously waiting. Jerome looked at his companions, then at the dogs, and finally at the weapons they carried. "Lower those shotguns," he ordered, his voice carrying an unusual emotion. "There will be no hunt today." A murmur of protests began, but Jerome raised his hand, silencing them. "There's a family in there. An injured mother and cubs that depend on her," he explained. "We are not family killers. We are men of honor." 1 of the younger hunters stepped forward, confused. "But they're wolves, Jerome, predators." "They are God's creatures, as the father said," replied the farmer, surprising everyone with his change of stance. "And they were victims of illegal hunters using prohibited traps on our lands." The mention of illegal traps provoked a wave of indignation among the men. Predatory hunting was a condemned practice in the region, not only for environmental reasons, but for putting at risk the safety of everyone who frequented the forest. "What will we do then?" someone asked. Anthony stepped forward, feeling it was time to propose his idea. "The female needs care that I cannot offer here," he said. "We need to take her to a safe place, where she can recover properly along with her cubs." "And where would that place be, Father?" questioned Jerome, still processing the transformation occurring within himself. Anthony took a deep breath before answering. What he was about to propose would change not only his life, but potentially the entire community's relationship with the nature around them. "The abandoned barn behind the chapel," he finally answered. "With some adjustments, it can become a temporary shelter until the female recovers and the family can return to the forest." The proposal was met with stunned silence. Bringing wild wolves within the village limits was unthinkable just a few hours ago. "That's crazy," someone murmured. "Maybe," agreed Anthony. "Or maybe it's exactly what we've been called to do at this moment." To his surprise, it was Jerome who spoke first in support of the idea. "I have waterproof tarps in my shed. That could line the barn," he offered. "And I can get clean hay to make a proper bed." One by one, other men began to offer help. One promised to bring meat scraps from his butcher shop. Another, with basic veterinary knowledge from raising horses, offered to examine the she-wolf's wound. Anthony watched amazed the transformation occurring before his eyes. The same men who hours before had set out to kill those animals were now mobilizing to save them. The male wolf remained at the entrance of the cave, observing the scene with his penetrating amber eyes. For a moment, his gaze met Anthony's, and the priest felt again that inexplicable connection, as if both understood they were witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. "We'll need a bigger stretcher to transport her safely," said the priest, turning his attention back to the group. "And we'll have to be extremely careful not to stress the cubs during the journey." While the men discussed the practical details of the rescue, Anthony stepped back a bit and looked at the sky through the tree canopies. The morning sun filtered through in golden rays, illuminating the clearing as if blessing that improbable moment of union between species. "Thank you," he murmured, not knowing exactly to whom he directed his gratitude, whether to God, to the wolves, or to nature itself, that had orchestrated that transformative encounter. In less than a week, the old barn behind the chapel of Our Lady of Guidance had transformed into a true sanctuary. The walls were reinforced, the floor covered with clean straw, and a special area was prepared for the she-wolf and her cubs. The space, previously abandoned, now pulsed with renewed energy, as if it had found its true purpose. The news spread quickly through Golden Ridge. What began as a small group of men helping the priest soon transformed into a community movement. Women brought food not only for the wolves, but also for the volunteers who worked tirelessly. Children appeared curious, kept at a safe distance, but marveled at the story that was now told at every corner of the village. At the center of it all was Father Anthony, dedicating every free moment to the care of the animals. The she-wolf, whom he secretly began to call Luna, showed slow but steady signs of recovery. Her wound, properly treated by the veterinarian from the neighboring town who had volunteered to help, was beginning to heal. The cubs grew healthy, increasingly active and curious about their new environment. The most surprising, however, was the behavior of the male wolf, whom Anthony called Guardian. The animal demonstrated extraordinary intelligence and adaptability. He came and went from the shelter at will, hunted in the forest, and faithfully returned to his family. Even more impressive was his apparent understanding of the human's role in his mate's recovery. He allowed Anthony and the veterinarian to approach Luna and the cubs without showing aggression, only attentive and respectful vigilance. On a particularly sunny morning, while Anthony was changing Luna's bandage, the barn door opened, revealing a figure he didn't expect. Mrs. Connie, the oldest and most respected person in Golden Ridge, with her 90 years of wisdom etched in the deep wrinkles of her face. "So it's true," she said, leaning on her cane as she observed the scene before her. "The priest brought wolves within our walls." Anthony rose slowly, cleaning his hands on a cloth. "Mrs. Connie, what a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here." The old woman advanced with slow but steady steps, her black and penetrating eyes fixed on the animals. "When I was a girl, my grandfather told me stories about the last wolves of these mountains," she said, her voice carrying the weight of ancient memories. "He said they were guardians of the forest, that they maintained the balance. When they disappeared, many things changed." Guardian, sitting near the entrance, observed the newcomer with attention, but without hostility. Mrs. Connie returned the gaze without fear. "He knows who I am," she stated with certainty. "They always know." "You're not afraid?" asked Anthony, surprised by the elderly woman's tranquility in front of a wild predator. Mrs. Connie smiled, revealing the few teeth she had left. "Age has taught me that it's rarely nature we should fear, Father. It's the intentions of men that bring true danger." As if to confirm her words, a commotion of raised voices approached the barn. The door opened again, this time with violence, and a group of residents entered, led by August Mendez, the mayor of Golden Ridge. "This has to end, Father Anthony," declared August, a corpulent middle-aged man known for his explosive temperament and arbitrary decisions. "You've exceeded all limits by bringing dangerous predators into the midst of our community." Guardian immediately stood up, the hair on his neck bristling, a low growl escaping his throat. Luna also became agitated, instinctively pulling the cubs closer to her. "Please, lower your voices," Anthony asked firmly. "You're frightening the animals." "Animals? You call these beasts animals as if they were harmless pets," continued August, pointing an accusing finger. "I've been receiving daily complaints. People are afraid to leave their homes. Children can no longer play freely." "That's not true," intervened Jerome Brandon, who was also present in the barn, helping with daily care. "No one has been threatened. The male only goes out to hunt and always far from properties." "And who guarantees it will stay that way?" questioned the mayor. "When he decides it's easier to attack our livestock, or worse, our children?" A murmur of approval ran through part of the group accompanying him. Anthony realized that the community was divided. While some, like Jerome, had witnessed the transformation and supported the initiative, others remained trapped in fear and old superstitions. It was Mrs. Connie who surprised everyone, advancing to the center of the barn with an authority that made even the mayor take a step back. "August Mendez, I changed your diapers when you were a crying baby, and now I see you're still crying about imaginary fears," she said, provoking some nervous laughter. "These wolves are a gift to our community, not a threat." With all due respect, Mrs. Connie, you don't understand the danger. I understand more than you imagine, the old woman cut him off. These animals are here for a purpose, and if you can't see that, then perhaps you need to rethink your position as a leader of this community. The tension was palpable. Anthony knew he needed to act quickly before the situation escalated further. I propose a solution, he said, placing himself between the two groups. We'll form a committee to supervise the shelter. Representatives from all parts of the community can participate, monitor the situation, and help with decisions. The proposal seemed to momentarily calm the spirits. Even August, reluctant to directly confront the growing popularity of the project, nodded stiffly. And we'll establish clear rules, continued Anthony. Controlled visits, specific hours, always with supervision. This way everyone can get to know the wolves, learn about them, and form their own opinions based on experience, not fear. The group began to discuss the details, and gradually the tension decreased. While the adults debated, no one noticed a small figure who had sneaked into the barn during the confusion. Clara, Jerome's 10-year-old granddaughter, silently approached the wolf cubs that were observing the scene with curiosity. It was a shout from August that alerted everyone. "The girl! Someone get the girl out of there!" Jerome turned abruptly, his face paling as he saw his granddaughter just a few steps away from the wolves. "Clara, come back here now," he ordered, his body frozen with terror. But Clara, with the innocent curiosity of children, was already extending her hand toward the nearest cub. Time seemed to slow down. Guardian, alerted by the movement, turned his attention to the girl. Luna, still lying down but visibly tense, watched attentively. Anthony wanted to intervene, but something stopped him. A deep instinct told him to trust, to let the moment unfold naturally. To everyone's amazement, the cub approached the extended hand, curiously sniffing it. Then, to the absolute disbelief of those present, gently licked the girl's fingers. Clara laughed, delighted, and looked at the group of paralyzed adults. "He likes me, Grandpa. He's so soft." Jerome's expression transformed from terror to astonishment, and finally to an emotion that bordered on reverence. Guardian observed the scene without intervening, as if approving the interaction. Mrs. Connie smiled, her eyes shining with ancestral wisdom. "This is how it begins," she murmured. "This is how fear transforms into understanding." The episode with Clara became a turning point. News of the miracle, the child who had touched the wolves without being attacked, spread rapidly, not only in Golden Ridge, but also in neighboring communities. Visitors began to appear, curious to see with their own eyes the extraordinary coexistence between humans and wolves. In the following weeks, the shelter expanded and organized itself. Volunteers established visiting hours, and Anthony, surprising himself, discovered himself in the role of educator, explaining the wolves' behavior, their ecological importance, and the need to protect their habitat. One day, while conducting one of these improvised lectures for a group of children from the local school, Anthony was interrupted by the arrival of the mailman, who handed him an official envelope with the diocese seal. "A letter from the bishop, Father," announced the man before withdrawing. Anthony felt a chill down his spine. He had dedicated himself so completely to the shelter that he had neglected his regular communications with his superiors. Now it seemed that news of his unusual activities had reached the ears of the church. With slightly trembling hands, he opened the envelope when he was alone. The letter was brief and formal, but its content was unequivocal. The bishop expressed deep concern about the reports received about the irregular situation in Golden Ridge, and requested that Father Anthony appear at the diocese headquarters the following week to discuss his commitment to pastoral priorities. The implied message was clear. His dedication to the wolves was seen as a deviation from his religious responsibilities. The possibility of being transferred or even removed from his duties loomed implicitly between the formal lines of the letter. Anthony sat heavily on a bench, the letter still in his hands. Doubt, for the first time since the beginning of that journey, settled in his heart. Was he really following the right path, or had he strayed from his true vocation, letting himself be carried away by an emotional connection with those animals? Guardian, as if sensing his anguish, approached and rested his head on his knee, looking at him with those amber eyes that seemed to contain ancient wisdom. Anthony automatically caressed the thick fur of the animal, finding inexplicable comfort in that contact. "What should I do, friend?" he murmured. "How can I choose between two callings that seem equally important?" The answer, he knew, would not come in words. He would have to seek clarity in his own heart, in prayer and reflection. He rose slowly, folded the letter, and put it in his pocket. That night, after closing the shelter activities, Anthony walked alone to the small chapel. Silence enveloped him when he entered the sacred space, illuminated only by a few candles. He knelt before the altar, and for the first time in many years allowed silent tears to run down his face as he prayed. He wasn't asking for an easy solution or a miraculous sign. He was asking only for discernment to understand if the path he was following was truly the one he should tread, if his work with the wolves was in some way incomprehensible to many, a legitimate extension of his spiritual mission. Hours passed, and when he finally stood up, his legs numb and his heart lighter, the first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the colored stained glass. He hadn't received a concrete answer, but he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. Upon leaving the chapel, he noticed a figure sitting on the entrance steps. It was Mrs. Connie, wrapped in a thick shawl against the dawn chill, seeming to have waited for him for hours. "The answer is rarely in the words of men, Father," she said without preamble, as if continuing a conversation already begun. "Even those who wear sacred clothes sometimes cannot see beyond their own limitations." Anthony sat beside her, surprised once more by the old woman's sharp perception. "How did you know I was in doubt?" he asked. Mrs. Connie smiled, her eyes reflecting the slowly brightening sky. "Because we all face that moment, when the path forks and we must choose between what we've always known and what our heart shows us to be true." She paused, looking at the forest that extended beyond the village limits. "You know, my grandfather told me that in ancient traditions, the wolf was considered a spiritual guide, a being that walks between two worlds and teaches us to see beyond appearances." Anthony absorbed her words, feeling there was a profound truth in them. "What should I do, Mrs. Connie?" "The Church questions my choices." "True faith, Father, is not confined within four walls," she responded with simplicity. "It's in the ability to recognize the divine in all creatures, to serve life in all its forms. What you did for that family of wolves is as sacred as any ritual celebrated in this chapel." The old woman's words echoed in Anthony's heart, bringing a clarity that the night of prayer had prepared, but not completed. His calling had always been to care for, protect, guide. And now, that calling had simply expanded to include creatures that most considered unworthy of spiritual attention. "Thank you," he said, taking the wrinkled hands of the woman between his. "Your wisdom has given me the courage I needed." Mrs. Connie squeezed his hands with surprising strength for someone her age. "Don't worry about the bishop," she said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "He'll receive more letters than he expected in the coming days. This community has learned a lot from you and your wolves. We won't abandon you now." Anthony smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. As the sun rose completely, illuminating the village of Golden Ridge, he understood that he wasn't just caring for a family of injured wolves. He was, in fact, participating in a much broader and deeper healing, the reconciliation between humanity and nature, between faith and universal compassion, between tradition and evolution. The meeting with Bishop Everett was less tense than Anthony had feared. What he didn't expect was to find a pile of letters on the religious leader's desk, dozens of them coming not only from Golden Ridge, but also from neighboring communities and even from larger cities where the story of the wolves had spread. "It seems you've created something bigger than you imagined, Father Anthony," said Bishop Everett, a thin man of 60, with keen eyes behind thin-framed glasses. "We have here everything from children's drawings to emotional accounts of spiritual conversions provoked by your unusual initiative." Anthony remained silent, awaiting the final verdict. The bishop adjusted his glasses and continued, his tone softer than expected. "I confess that my first reaction was one of concern. A priest dedicating his time to wild wolves seemed at the very least a distraction from his pastoral obligations. He paused, picking up one of the letters. But then I received this from a lady named Connie. She writes that for the first time in decades, the community of Golden Ridge is truly united. That old wounds are being healed, that children are learning compassion and respect for nature, that even former hunters now protect the forest. Bishop Everett looked directly into Anthony's eyes. That is pastoral work, isn't it? I believe. So, Your Excellency, replied Anthony, feeling cautious relief. Saint Francis taught us that all creatures are our brothers and sisters, and that we should praise God through care for his creation. The bishop nodded slowly. I have my reservations about unconventional methods, Father, but I cannot deny the fruits that your work is producing. For now you have my permission to continue, as long as your traditional obligations are not neglected. The journey back to Golden Ridge was filled with reflections for Anthony. The bishop's conditional blessing was more than he expected, but he knew that the true challenge was yet to come. Luna was almost completely recovered, the cubs were growing rapidly, and soon the moment would arrive that he simultaneously expected and feared: the family's return to nature. Upon arriving at the village, he was surprised by an unusual movement. In the center of the square, a television crew was setting up equipment while onlookers gathered around. Marina Carter, a renowned environmental journalist, was animatedly conversing with Jerome and other community members. "Father Anthony," she exclaimed upon seeing him. "Finally, we meet the man behind the story that's moving the entire country." Anthony stopped, confused. "Pardon me, but I don't understand." "The video, Father," explained Jerome, approaching. "Remember when the schoolchildren visited the shelter last week? The teacher recorded their interaction with the cubs and posted it on social media. It exploded. Millions of views." Marina nodded enthusiastically. "We're producing a special report on the transformation of Golden Ridge, the story of how a priest and a family of wolves are changing an entire community's relationship with nature." Anthony felt momentarily overwhelmed. He had never sought publicity. His only goal had been to help creatures in need. But he also realized that this exposure could be an opportunity to spread the message of coexistence and respect far beyond the limits of his small village. In the days that followed, Golden Ridge transformed. The report attracted visitors from all over the country, curious to see the miracle of the wolves, as the media had dubbed the phenomenon. Environmentalists, researchers, and authorities arrived daily, interested in studying and replicating the experience. The shelter, once an improvised solution, now received technical and financial support. A team of biologists specialized in predator conservation offered guidance on how to prepare the wolves for their eventual return to nature. An environmental NGO proposed the creation of a permanent protection area in the surrounding forest. Amid all this turmoil, Anthony remained focused on the animals' welfare. Luna already walked normally, although a slight limp remained as a reminder of her injury. The cubs, now practically young adults, demonstrated the curiosity and energy typical of their age. Guardian continued his role as protector, but had also developed an incredible ability to interact with selected humans, mainly Anthony and the children, who regularly visited the shelter. On a quiet afternoon, while watching Luna playing with the cubs, Anthony felt a presence beside him. It was Dr. Philip Snow, the biologist who led the conservation team. "She's ready, Father," said the scientist, observing the she-wolf, "and the cubs too. It's time." Anthony felt a tightness in his chest, despite knowing that this moment was inevitable and necessary. "How much time do we have?" "The next full moon would be ideal," replied Philip. 5 days from now, we've already identified a perfect area about 20 miles from here, isolated enough to ensure safety, but with an abundance of prey and water." Anthony nodded silently, trying to ignore the pain of the imminent separation. During these months, he had developed a deep bond with those animals, especially with Guardian. The idea of no longer seeing those amber eyes every morning caused a sadness he hadn't expected to feel. News of the wolves' return to nature quickly spread through the community, provoking diverse reactions. For many, it was the natural and expected conclusion to the story. For others, especially the children, it was difficult to accept the departure of the animals that had become an integral part of village life. On the night before the big day, a spontaneous vigil formed around the shelter. Dozens of people gathered, in silence, some holding candles, others simply contemplating the starry sky. Anthony conducted a brief ceremony, not strictly religious but deeply spiritual, in which he thanked for the lesson of union and compassion that the wolves had brought. "They don't belong to us," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "They never did. We were just temporary guardians honored with the mission of caring for them until they could follow their true path. Tomorrow, we return to nature what was always hers." Mrs. Connie, seated in a chair specially brought for her, rose with the help of her cane. "They may leave," she said with her ancient and firm voice, "but what we learned from them will remain. The seed has been planted and will continue growing in our hearts." The next morning, under a clear blue sky, an unusual procession formed at the exit of Golden Ridge. At the front, a specially adapted vehicle transported the 4 wolves in comfortable and secure compartments. Behind, dozens of cars and even people on foot followed toward the location chosen for the release. The journey took almost 2 hours on secondary roads and finally on a trail that only 4-wheel drive vehicles could traverse. When they finally reached the designated clearing, a breathtaking landscape revealed itself. Mountains covered with dense forest, a crystalline river winding through the valley below, and the infinite sky above their heads. "It's perfect," murmured Anthony, admiring the wild beauty of the place. The team of biologists positioned the transport crates in a specific formation, facing the forest. All those present were instructed to maintain absolute silence and stay at least 50 yards away from the release point. Anthony, as the central figure of that extraordinary journey, received the honor of opening the doors. He approached slowly, his heart beating strongly in his chest. He stopped in front of the first crate where Luna patiently waited. "Go in peace," he whispered, before opening the mechanism. The she-wolf hesitated for a moment, looking outside with caution. Then, with a graceful movement, she leapt to freedom, stopping a few yards away to sniff the air. Her fur shone under the sunlight, and the slight limp in her hind leg was now almost imperceptible. Next, Anthony released the 3 cubs, who immediately ran to their mother, hopping with the characteristic energy of youth. The crowd held their breath, witnessing the emotional moment in absolute silence. Finally came Guardian's moment. Anthony knelt before the last crate, his eyes already misty. "Thank you, my friend," he said softly, before opening the door. The impressive grey wolf came out calmly, with the dignity that had always characterized him. Instead of immediately running to join his family, who waited at the edge of the clearing, he stopped in front of Anthony. For a long moment, man and wolf stared at each other. In those amber eyes, Anthony saw something that transcended human understanding, a recognition, a connection that defied any rational explanation. Then, to the amazement of all present, Guardian moved closer and gently touched his muzzle to the priest's forehead, in a gesture that seemed both blessing and farewell. A collective sigh ran through the crowd. Some were openly crying, others filming the extraordinary moment, but all felt they were witnessing something sacred. Guardian slowly moved away and joined his family. The 4 wolves remained for a few more moments at the edge of the forest, as if posing for one last photograph. Then, in perfect synchrony, they turned and disappeared among the trees, swallowed by the green vastness that would now be their home again. The silence that followed was profound and respectful. No one moved for several minutes, as if afraid to break the spell of that moment. Finally, it was Jerome who approached Anthony, still kneeling in the same place. "Father?" he called gently, extending his hand to help him up. Anthony accepted the support and stood, his face wet with silent tears, but his countenance serene. "It is done," he said simply. The return to Golden Ridge was marked by an atmosphere of conclusion and, at the same time, new beginning. In the days that followed, the shelter was transformed into an environmental education center, where children and adults could learn about the importance of predators for ecological balance and the need to preserve their habitats. The story of the wolves of Golden Ridge became a national symbol of conservation and harmonious coexistence. The documentary produced by Marina Carter won international awards and inspired similar initiatives in other regions. Delegations came from afar to learn about the community conservation model that had spontaneously emerged in the small village. Father Anthony continued his pastoral work, but now with an additional dimension, the defense of the environment as a natural extension of care for divine creation. His Sunday homilies frequently included reflections on the interconnection of all forms of life and human responsibility to protect and preserve nature. The village prospered with responsible ecotourism, and the former hunters became guides and guardians of the forest. Illegal traps were completely banned, and a community surveillance system ensured that the area remained safe for wildlife. Sometimes, during his solitary walks through the forest, Anthony imagined seeing a grey figure among the trees, or heard a distant howl on full moon nights. He was never sure if they were really Guardian and his family, or just the echo of his memories. But deep down, he knew it didn't matter. The connection established transcended physical presence. On an autumn afternoon, almost a year after the wolves' release, Anthony was walking on the trail that led to the small waterfall at the village limits. It was his favorite place to meditate, where the sound of water created the perfect atmosphere for reflection and prayer. As he approached the clearing that preceded the waterfall, he suddenly stopped. In the center of the open space, illuminated by the golden rays of the setting sun, was a grey wolf. It wasn't Guardian. This one was younger, probably one of the cubs, now fully grown. Man and animal remained motionless, observing each other across the distance. There was no fear or threat, only recognition. After a few moments, the wolf slightly inclined its head in a gesture that almost seemed like a greeting, before turning and silently disappearing into the woods. Anthony smiled, his heart overflowing with serene joy. That brief encounter was the sign he had unconsciously been waiting for, the confirmation that the family was well, adapted to wildlife, but still connected in some mysterious way to the human who had helped them when they most needed it. That night, as the full moon illuminated the sky over Golden Ridge, a chorus of howls echoed through the mountains. The residents came to their doorsteps, not with fear but with smiles of recognition. Children pointed excitedly at the forest, some trying to imitate the sound. Adults exchanged knowing looks, as if sharing a precious secret. In the small chapel, Father Anthony lit a candle and knelt in gratitude. Through the colored glass of the windows, the silvery light of the moon poured over the altar, creating a pattern that resembled the mottled fur of a wolf. The howls continued, a primitive and sacred music that seemed to unite heaven and earth, human and wild, faith and nature. "Thank you," murmured Anthony, not only to God, but to all beings who had participated in that extraordinary journey. For teaching us that the true miracle lies in the ability to see beyond differences and recognize the divine spark in all creatures. Outside, the village of Golden Ridge rested peacefully under the starry sky, transformed forever by the improbable encounter between a man of faith and a family of wolves. And in the vastness of the forest, protected by the welcoming darkness of night, Guardian and his family continued their wild and free existence, invisible guardians of a territory that was now revered and protected by the same humans who had once feared them. Just as the wolves found a new beginning thanks to human compassion, the community of Golden Ridge discovered a new way of existing in harmony with nature. And at the center of this transformation was the most valuable lesson of all, that love and respect can tear down the oldest barriers and overcome